Hi, so today we're going to look at bar graphs and line graphs. We're going to look at pulling information from them and then also creating our own. So let's just go over a few quick things and then we're going to go ahead and get started with some examples. Data, that's the pieces of information that are going to be often numerical. Sometimes it's not always, like in this case, we've got part numerical because we're actually talking about different types of endangered species, but then the numbered part comes in with the frequency. Data is often shown as a table. A graph is a more visual way to display the data. A bar graph is used to compare categories of data. That's really important to know, is when to use what graph. Bar graphs are really good to use when you are trying to compare different pieces of information. The height of each bar represents the frequency of each category. The frequency is the number of times an item occurs. For example, the frequency of endangered species of birds in the United States is 76. So let's look at the different parts here. You can see that we have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. The scale is written on the vertical axis, and it includes the least number, which is 13, and the greatest number, which is 76. We can't actually see the table here. We didn't get it copied and put on here. But whenever you are making your bar graph, you want to make sure that you make your bar graph with the least number and the greatest number. You don't want to leave any pieces of data off. The scale is written in different kinds of intervals. That's something also to be important whenever you're thinking about making your own graph, is what your intervals should be with. For example, here, this is written in intervals of 10. Notice on the right hand or on the left hand side, the vertical axis, it's counting by 10, 0, 10, 20, and so on. Whenever your numbers are quite large, your interval will be quite large. If your if your numbers are smaller, then your intervals would be smaller. So for example, if I had numbers just up to 10 or 12, I would probably count by ones. If I had an interval in the hundreds, I would probably count by 100, and so on. All right, then you got your horizontal axis. Your horizontal axis is going to be used in this example. This is going to be dealing with all your different categories. So you've got all your different kinds of endangered species. We could actually turn this graph and make this into a horizontal bar graph. This is a vertical bar graph because the bars are going vertically. But we can turn it and you can see bar graphs that are horizontal. Let's look at a line graph. Another type of graph is a line graph. A line graph is used to show how data sets change over a period of time. So like a bar graph is used to compare data, a line graph is used when you're dealing with something over time. It's a great bar graph, or a great way to organize your data dealing with over an amount of time. By observing the upward or downward slant of the lines connecting the points, you can describe the trends in the data. A lot of times you'll see line graphs dealt with stock market trends, what's going on in the stock market, how things either rise or fall, in weather, whether the temperature is rising or falling. Let's take a couple of looks at this graph and go over a few pieces. So again, we have our vertical and our horizontal axis. Our vertical axis here is written in intervals of 5. And then we also have our horizontal axis, which has our years. And one thing I want to mention and bring up is right here. That is called a break. And what that does is that means that we didn't really have any numbers less than 30. And so what you do is you do this little squiggly line, and it basically just says we are now going to start with 30, but we understand that really we should have started at 0. Because that is there, this is going to be considered a misleading graph. Okay? It is a misleading graph because of that break. So let's try a couple examples about pulling information and for writing and making our own graph here. So we've got our table, and what we're wanting to do is we're going to want to make a bar graph based on this. So let's go ahead and answer a few questions. It says, what category did the students spend the highest amount on? Well, that would be our clothing. Okay. Considering the time of year, what could be the reasoning for this? Who knows? We don't know the full story here, so I don't know. Maybe the weather was cold or something they needed, or maybe the weather was hot and they needed to get new clothes. How much did they spend in August? Well, again, I'm going to omit that question because we don't have that kind of data here. The main thing I wanted to do with this example is create our own bar graph. And what I liked about this is that it does give us kind of like a checklist. So the first thing is title. So this might be a budget. Okay, this could be somebody's budget. We don't know exactly what it is, but we do want to have a title. Okay, check that off. Horizontal axis with even space bars. So our horizontal axis is down here, and we want to make sure that we just have all of our bars. We also want to label down here. So here, this might be clothing and so forth, but before I label it, I want to go ahead and get my vertical bars and my intervals done. So when I'm looking at my numbers, I see that the largest number is 85. So I'm going to try to make this where this goes up to 85. So let's see here, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So the best way to probably count these is by tens. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to count by, that line would be 20, that line would be 40, that line would be 60, and this line would be 80. See, so this one is showing us our clothing, and I don't have a lot of room, so I'm just going to use C. So I've got my clothing. Food would go up to 80. So there's my food bar. Transportation goes up to 25. Entertainment is 60. Entertainment. And then we have miscellaneous, which is 15. So maybe something like that. All right, so I've labeled it. I don't have room here, but a horizontal might be categories. That might be my label for my horizontal axis. And over here we can do this. This is just in dollars. All right, so I've got a horizontal axis. It has evenly spaced bars, check. I have a horizontal label, and I have vertical labels, and I have the correct scale. So that's how we would just make a bar graph. It's very simple, just going back and forth with your data. Let's try to gather some information from a bar graph. Letter A, how many classmates have a birthday in the spring? Let's see here, that would be about 14, 13, 14 students. We're just counting up. Which season does the class have the least number of birthdays? That would be fall, just because it has the smallest bar. And how many students are in the class? Well, how would we find that out? We would need to find out each bar. Like we say this one is about 14. This one may be about 6. This one could be about 3. And winter is right at 10. So then we would add up all of our numbers. So 14 and 6, that would be 20. 20 and 10, that would be 30, and then another 3, so about 33 students. And you could be off 1 or 2 numbers here just based on where the line is, since it doesn't actually meet at points, but that's all there is. Let's try to make our own bar graph, or line graph now. So it says the table is a student spending over a school year. All right, let's try to answer these questions. Which month does a student spend the most? So the most that they spend is in September. And the least amount they spend would be January. Give a reasonable explanation for March's high spending. I don't know, maybe spring break. They went out of town. Who knows? Okay. And calculate the amount of spending for each semester. We're not going to spend time doing that. Here you would just add. That's nothing new. Let's get into actually making our line graphs. So each one of these lines I'm going to say is a month. So we've got September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, and June. Each line is. And we need this to go up to 120. So let's see here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines. So we could count by tens. So that line would be 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, and the very top up here would be 120. So the way I do line graphs is I actually make points and then I connect the dots. So in September, I'm going to do a dot right on the 120. October would be 75, so maybe somewhere around there. November was $30, so right there. December went all the way up to 100. January just at 15. February was at 80. March is at 95. April is at 25. May is at 40. And June is at 75. And then from here, I like to just connect. You'll have to excuse some of my lines here. There we go. There's our line graph. And so you can see where the biggest and the smallest, the steepest into it. Okay, let's try to answer a few questions. Letter A. What was the closing stock price for this company on Tuesday? So on Tuesday, go to Tuesday, it was at $40. What was the lowest price per share this week? What was the lowest price? It was on Wednesday, and it was for $25. Over the week, approximately, how much did the price per share increase? So it started at about $31. And at the end of the week, it went up to about $53. So if we were to subtract that, we would get 22. So over the week, it raised $22. So that's just an examples of information. And then the last one I wanted to go over, because you do see these kinds of questions, is by matching a table with the correct bar graph. So that's what we're looking for here. And to do that, I'm looking for letter A should be close to 50. So when I look at this choice A, that is nowhere close to 50. Done. Letter C, not even close. Letter B and D, those are both close to 50, so I'm going to move on to another one. Letter B should be a little bit below, and they both are. Okay, so that's true. Letter C should be about 20. Those are about 20. Okay, I'm going to leave that one alone. Letter D should be at 10. All right, here's this. That one's gone. There's our answer. Just go all the way through to make sure each one of them makes sense and is correct. And that's all there is with bar graphs and line graphs. I think a lot of it is just straightforward, but you do want to not go fast in this. You want to take your time because these questions can be easy, but that's where they can trick you, is because they think they've got you off your game. So really hone in and make sure you're paying attention to the question, and make sure you're paying attention to your intervals and your labels.